The doors didn't open. They exploded. 87 pounds of retired military working dog hit the sliding glass entrance of Harlow Veterinary Trauma Center at full speed, and for approximately 4 seconds, the entire building forgot how to function. A technician's tray went airborne, syringes scattered across linoleum. Someone near the reception desk knocked over a full cart of IV bags and didn't stop running until she reached the parking lot. The dog, massive, scarred along one shoulder, eyes locked forward like a weapon tracking a target, swept the room with a gaze that made grown adults press themselves against walls. Then the dog stopped. Not because of the security guard fumbling for his radio, not because of the senior veterinarian shouting orders from behind a steel door, because of a 29-year-old nurse standing in the middle of the floor with stained scrubs, a cracked stethoscope, and the kind of stillness that doesn't come from training. It comes from somewhere else entirely. The dog walked to her, sat down, and stayed. Nobody in that building knew why. Nobody knew who she really was. And that ignorance, comfortable, institutional, deliberate, was about to cost every single one of them. If this is your first time here, follow along and stay until the end, because this story goes places nobody saw coming. Hit like, leave a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. The morning had started, as most of Emily Vasquez's mornings did, with someone else taking credit for her work. It wasn't dramatic. It never was. Dr. Philip Ostrander had simply walked into the case review at 7:45 a.m. He picked up the treatment file she'd flagged at midnight and presented the updated pain protocol to the department head as though he'd developed it himself. He didn't look at her when he did it. Nobody looked at her. She sat in the back row of the conference room at Harlow Veterinary Trauma Center with a paper cup of vending machine coffee and watched it happen the way she'd watched it happen 100 times before, with the specific practiced quietness of someone who had learned that reacting only made things worse. Harlow was a mid-sized facility in Creston Falls, Wyoming, the kind of town that had one real hospital and a veterinary trauma center that served ranchers, working dogs, and the occasional exotic animal case that came down from the mountains. The staff was small enough that everyone knew each other and large enough that people could still be invisible if the right people decided to look through them. Emily had been invisible at Harlow for 3 years. She was good at her job. Genuinely, quietly good at it, in a way that people noticed only when things went wrong, and she was the one who fixed them. She had a particular aptitude for wound care, for reading subtle behavioral shifts in animals in pain, for the kind of systematic assessment that took experience most people her age hadn't accumulated yet. She'd accumulated it, somewhere, somehow, but nobody at Harlow had ever thought to ask where. Her supervisor, Deborah Fitch, had a talent for finding Emily's work valuable and Emily herself disposable. Deborah was 53, had been at Harlow for 19 years, and operated the department with the specific confidence of a person who had never once been seriously wrong about anything in her own memory. She assigned Emily the cases nobody wanted, the post-surgical complications, the animals with behavioral issues, the elderly patients who needed round-the-clock monitoring, and then appeared during rounds to make observations about things Emily had already addressed, in a voice that suggested Emily should be grateful for the guidance. "You left the mobility assessment incomplete on the Shepherd in Bay 4, Deborah had said to her that morning, just before the case review, in the hallway, loud enough for 2 other techs to hear. "I completed it at 5:30, Emily said. "The update's in the system." Deborah had looked at her with the patient expression of someone correcting a child. "Then you should have flagged it more clearly." Emily didn't say anything. She had flagged it clearly. She had flagged it with 3 separate notation markers because she'd learned that Deborah needed 3 before she'd look. She drank her coffee and went back to Bay 4. The Shepherd in Bay 4 was recovering from a corrective tendon procedure. His name was listed on the chart as Biscuit, which felt like a cruel joke for a dog with that much dignity. He was a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois with amber eyes and the carefully controlled temperament of an animal who had been asked to do serious things and had done them. He watched Emily enter the room without flinching, tracked her movements with mild interest, and submitted to the mobility assessment with the cooperative stillness of a patient who had learned that humans with quiet hands meant less pain, not more. Emily worked through the assessment efficiently, making notes in the tablet with one hand while keeping the other moving slowly along the dog's rear leg, checking for swelling, warmth, The subtle tells that didn't always show up on imaging but showed up under a careful hand. Biscuit exhaled slowly through his nose. Emily marked the notation, scratched him once behind the ear, not because it was protocol, but because he'd earned it, and moved on to her next case. She had 4 more to get through before 9. She always had 4 more. By 11 o'clock, the morning had normalized into its usual rhythm of controlled insufficiency. Too many patients, too few hours, the particular tension of a department that functioned on the labor of people like Emily while rewarding people like Ostrander. She was midway through a dressing change on a cattle dog who had lost an argument with a piece of farm equipment when she heard the commotion in the lobby. She heard it before she understood it, a crash, the specific high pitch of people surprised and scared, the metallic clatter of something heavy hitting the floor. She set down the saline, told the cattle dog to stay still in a tone that he actually listened to, and walked toward the lobby. She got there just after the doors finished swinging. Later, she would recall the specific sequence of what she saw: the overturned cart, the glass syringes scattered like transparent shrapnel, Carol from reception backed against the far wall with her hands up, and Ricky the security guard standing near the entrance with his radio unclipped and his face the color of old paper. And in the center of all of it, this dog. He was a German shepherd with a military build, the kind of musculature that doesn't come from a kennel, but from years of real work. Black saddle across a tan body, one ear slightly crumpled at the tip from an old injury, a diagonal scar running from his left shoulder partway down his chest. He was moving in tight, agitated circles, head low, reading the room the way trained working dogs do, not randomly, but systematically, clearing angles. He wasn't attacking, he was in crisis, and there was a difference, but nobody in the lobby seemed to understand that, and their panic was feeding his. "Someone call animal control," Deborah's voice came from somewhere behind Emily. "Don't," Emily said. It wasn't loud. She didn't mean it as an order, but it landed like one, and Deborah stopped mid-sentence and stared. Emily walked into the center of the lobby. She moved without hesitation and without speed, which was the only right answer in that room. Fast movement would have triggered him. Frozen stillness would have too. She moved like someone who understood that the dog was reading every single thing she did and had already formed a preliminary judgment that she was not a threat, and that all she needed to do was confirm it. She crouched when she was about 8 feet away, not to make herself small, so to put herself at his eye level and take the vertical dominance out of her posture. She didn't make eye contact. She let her hands hang open at her sides, fingers loose. The dog stopped circling. He looked at her. Something passed across his face. Not recognition exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that came from dogs who had worked closely with humans in high-stress environments and had learned to read them at a level most people didn't know was possible. He was reading her, and whatever he read, it was enough. He walked to her and sat down. The room was completely silent. "Holy!" someone started and stopped. Emily kept her posture neutral, let him sniff her wrist, didn't move until his breathing slowed from the rapid, shallow pattern she'd clocked as soon as she entered. It took about 40 seconds. When his exhale finally lengthened, she straightened up slowly and put a hand on the back of his neck. Not a grip, just contact. Grounding. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." The dog leaned into her hand. Deborah found her voice first. That was extremely reckless. Her tone had recovered its authority, which was impressive given that 30 seconds ago, she'd been the one pressing herself against the reception desk. "You could have been seriously injured." Emily didn't answer. She was looking at the dog's left shoulder, the one with the scar, and the way he was holding his rear left leg. The weight distribution was wrong. He was compensating, had been compensating long enough that the shift had become habitual, the kind of postural adaptation that developed over months, not days. "He's in pain," she said. "He's a military dog," Ricky offered helpfully. "Could be the handler's out front. There was a truck. The handler was, in fact, out front. His name was Cole Navarro, and he was 36 years old, recently separated from military service, and currently standing in the Harlow parking lot having what appeared to be a very controlled internal crisis. He was 6 feet even, lean in the way of people who stayed physically disciplined, not for aesthetics, but because it was part of how they functioned. He had dark hair cut short, a jaw that looked like it had absorbed a hit or two and hadn't apologized for it, and the specific bearing of someone who had spent enough years operating in high-stakes environments that calm was now his default setting, even when it was costing him something. "Mr. Navarro?" Ricky said from the entrance. "Your dog is, he's inside." "I know." Cole's voice was flat. He bolted. I was getting his file from the truck. He had a manila folder in one hand and a worn tactical lead in the other. He walked through the entrance and into the lobby, and the first thing he did when he saw the dog, Titan, according to the ID tag, was exhale. Short, controlled. Relief he hadn't shown outside. Then he saw Emily. "What did you give him?" "Nothing," Emily said. Cole looked at her the way people look at an answer that doesn't fit the question they actually asked. Then he looked at Titan, who was still leaning against Emily's leg with the unhurried calm of an animal that had decided something and wasn't changing its mind. "He doesn't do that." "He did today." Deborah appeared at Emily's shoulder with the particular timing she had for moments when she could reassert authority. "Mr. Navarro, I'm Deborah Fitch, department head. I'm so sorry for the disruption. We'll get Titan settled into an exam room right away, and I'll have one of our senior veterinarians." "He needs a full trauma assessment," Emily said, not to Deborah, to Cole. "His rear left gait is wrong. He's been compensating for a while. How long has he been showing the limp?" Cole looked at her again. "He's not limping. He's distributing weight away from the rear left when he's stationary. It's subtle, but it's consistent. You'd only catch it if you were looking at the feet and not the face." She paused. "Who did his last evaluation?" Something shifted in Cole's expression, not defensiveness. Something more complicated than that. "Military Vet Services, 6 months ago. Cleared him fully." "What was the evaluation for?" "Retirement processing." Emily looked at Titan. The dog looked back at her. "I want to do a full assessment," she said. "Imaging included." "With respect," Cole said, and he said it in the tone that means the respect is limited. "I think I'd rather have the senior veterinarian." "Dr. Ostrander," Deborah said immediately. "He's excellent. He actually developed our current—" "Sure," Emily said. "That's fine." She stepped back, and Titan stood up, moved away from Deborah, moved away from the direction of Ostrander's office, and returned to Emily's side. The room went quiet again. Cole looked at his dog. He looked at Emily. He pressed his mouth into a line and made the calculation that people make when the situation has already made the decision for them. "Fine," he said. "You. But I'm in the room." "I'd expect that," Emily said. She started the way she always started, from the outside in, from the observable to the internal, from what the animal was willing to show her to what it was hiding. She had Titan on the examination table, which he tolerated with the mild distaste of an animal who didn't love the table but understood the protocol. Cole stood at the far end, one hand on Titan's head, watching Emily with the kind of attention that wasn't hostile, but wasn't relaxed either. Emily worked in silence mostly, which seemed to unsettle Cole more than noise would have. He'd expected questions, probably. Explanations. She gave him the examination instead. Systematic, unhurried, hands moving over muscle and joint with the kind of familiarity that came from having done this thousands of times, or something close enough to it that the body still remembered. "He retired 8 months ago?" she asked, without looking up. 9. "What was his primary role?" "Detection. Some patrol." Cole paused. "He was good at it." "I can tell." She said it simply, not as a compliment designed to soften anything. The dog's build, his behavioral baseline, the way he'd responded to a high-stress environment, all of it told a story about a working animal that had been well-trained and seriously used. "Any incidents in the last 18 months? Anything that would have been logged as a minor injury at the time?" Cole's hand stilled on Titan's head. "There was a vehicle incident," he said after a moment. 14 months ago. He cleared the vet assessment 6 weeks after." "What kind of vehicle incident?" "He was in a transport. The vehicle rolled. He was assessed for soft tissue and cleared." Emily moved to Titan's left hip and applied careful, specific pressure in a sequence that wasn't random. She was following a pattern, checking for something. Titan's back leg shifted and he made a sound, barely audible, barely anything. But Emily heard it. She stepped back. I need imaging. You found something? Cole's voice had changed. The flatness was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. The specific weight of a person bracing for something they'd half expected for a long time. I want to confirm it before I tell you what I think I'm looking at. Tell me what you think you're looking at. She looked at him. A fracture. Left ilium, possibly the acetabulum. Not new. Cole stared at her. He was cleared, I know. She held his gaze. I want the imaging before we talk further. It took 20 minutes to get Titan through the digital radiograph series, another 8 minutes for Emily to pull the images up on the monitor in the reading room. She stood in front of the screen with her arms crossed, Titan's file open on the desk beside her, and looked at what the imaging had found with the specific stillness of someone confirming a suspicion they hadn't wanted to be right about. Cole came in behind her. He looked at the screen. He was quiet for a long time. The fracture was there. Not a hairline, not an ambiguity. A significant fracture of the left ilium with clear evidence of improper healing, which meant it had been healing on its own for an extended period, which meant it had been there for an extended period. The joint showed signs of the chronic inflammation that developed around untreated structural injuries. The pain Titan had been working through, had been adapting around, had been carrying like something he'd decided was simply part of being alive now. It was right there on the screen in black and white. How long? Cole said. The healing pattern suggests at least a year, possibly longer. He was cleared 14 months ago, after the vehicle incident. Yes, Emily said. You're telling me the evaluation missed this? She didn't answer immediately. She was looking at the imaging with an expression that wasn't anger. It was something more contained, something that had moved past anger into a place that was colder and more useful. I'm telling you what the imaging shows, she said carefully, what it means about the evaluation. That's a different conversation. Cole turned away from the screen and put his hands on the desk and stood there for a moment with his back to her. When he turned back, his face was composed in the way of someone who had made a decision about what to do with what they were feeling. He's been working at a training facility, he said. Demonstrations. For the last 6 months. Because they cleared him. The last 3 words came out with a different quality than the others. Not louder, but heavier. I put him through 6 months of demonstration work on a fractured hip because they told me he was healthy. I'm sorry, Emily said. It wasn't a performance. Cole heard the difference. He looked at her. Really looked. The way he hadn't quite done since he'd walked in. Who are you? He said. Not aggressively. Actually, asking. Emily Vasquez, I'm a nurse here. You're a nurse, he repeated. Yes. How do you... He stopped. Started again. You moved through that lobby like you've handled military working dogs before. She went back to the imaging and began pulling up a secondary series. Let's focus on Titan right now, she said. We need to talk about pain management and imaging protocol, and then we need to talk about surgical options. Cole watched her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Yeah, he said. Okay. She had a treatment plan drafted and a referral to a veterinary orthopedic specialist pulled up on the tablet when Deborah walked into the reading room with a look on her face that Emily had seen before. The look that meant something Emily had done had generated a complication that Deborah was about to make Emily's problem. A word, Deborah said. Her eyes went to Cole, then to Titan. Privately. Whatever you have to say it, Cole said. He'd made up his mind about something in the last 20 minutes, and Deborah's preferred approach to managing Emily was not going to benefit from his presence. Deborah's jaw tightened. She looked at Emily. The imaging results need to be reviewed by Dr. Ostrander before any plan is communicated to the patient. To the client, she corrected. That's protocol. I've seen the imaging, Cole said. She's already communicated the results to me. Mr. Navarro, the imaging raises some serious questions about prior veterinary clearances. And before we say anything further, we need to make sure the hospital's documentation is complete. She said it smoothly, but the meaning underneath it was not smooth at all. Emily, Dr. Ostrander would like to review the file. Emily looked at her. She understood exactly what was happening. Deborah wasn't concerned about documentation. She was concerned about a mid-level nurse generating findings that implied institutional failure somewhere in a military evaluation chain. And she was concerned about where those findings might go. It was the kind of institutional instinct that wasn't malicious exactly. It was just the reflex of a person who had learned that complicated discoveries were best handled quietly. The imaging is documented, Emily said. It's in the system. Dr. Ostrander can review it anytime he'd like. I'd like you to step out of this case. Cole's head turned. I'm sorry? Dr. Ostrander will take over Titan's care, Deborah said. Emily, there are 2 other cases that need... She stays on this case, Cole said. His voice hadn't risen. That was somehow worse. My dog didn't let anyone else near him. She's his primary. Mr. Navarro, I understand your preference, but clinic protocol requires that findings of this nature be... I don't care about clinic protocol, Cole said. With respect. The respect this time was not limited. It was simply absent. She stays on the case. Unless you want to explain to me why a clinic that just found a year-old fracture in a military working dog who was cleared by military evaluators wants to pull the person who found it off the case before anyone asks why it was missed. The room was very quiet. Deborah looked at Emily. Emily looked at the tablet. She was already thinking about the orthopedic referral, about the pain management protocol, about what Titan's recovery timeline looked like, and what Cole needed to understand about what came next. She was already 3 steps ahead of this conversation. Deborah left. She didn't say anything else, she just left. Cole watched the door. Does she do that a lot? Sometimes, Emily said. He looked at her again with that particular quality of attention she was starting to recognize. He was rebuilding something in his head, updating an assessment he'd formed when he first walked in. You didn't push back, he said. When she tried to pull you, you just waited. I didn't need to push back, Emily said. You did. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah. A pause. Still. She set the tablet down and turned to face him properly. Titan is going to need surgery, she said. There's a specialist in Cheyenne I want to refer him to, Dr. Anika Sandoval. She's the best orthopedic I know for this kind of structural repair in a working dog. The imaging I've got is enough for her to begin planning, but she'll want her own series, she paused. The recovery is going to take time, 4 to 6 months minimum, before he's fully weight-bearing on that leg. He's going to need... She stopped. Because the door to the reading room opened again, and it wasn't Deborah. It was 2 people she didn't recognize, a man and a woman, both in civilian clothes that had the particular studied ordinariness of people who wore civilian clothes on purpose. The man was mid-40s, carrying a leather-bound folder. The woman was younger, had a lanyard around her neck that she'd tucked under her jacket collar, and was looking at Emily with the focused attention of someone who had seen a photograph and was confirming it against the real thing. Emily Vasquez? The woman said. Emily stood still. Yes. We're with the Federal Investigative Services Office, Animal Welfare and Military Procurement Division. She held up a credential briefly. We've been trying to reach you for 3 days. Cole stared at Emily. His expression had gone through several rapid iterations and landed somewhere between recalibrated and unsettled. You know what this is about? He said. Emily looked at the 2 agents. She looked at Cole. She looked at Titan, who was watching the door with alert, calm eyes, ears forward, tail still. Yes, she said. I know what it's about. Her voice was the same as it had been all morning, even, contained, giving nothing away. But her jaw had tightened by a fraction, and her hands, which had been loose and precise through every procedure, every confrontation, every moment of this long and terrible morning, had gone still at her sides. We should close the door, she said. The door closed with a soft, definitive click, and the reading room, which had already seen too much that morning, became something else entirely. The male agent, who introduced himself as Special Investigator Marcus Webb, set his leather folder on the desk beside the imaging monitor without asking permission. His partner, Agent Dana Forsyth, remained near the door with the particular stillness of someone trained to watch rooms rather than people. Cole hadn't moved. He was standing where he'd been when the agents walked in, one hand still resting on Titan's flank, working through something behind his eyes that he hadn't arrived at yet. 3 days, Emily said. You mentioned 3 days. We've been calling the number we had on file, Webb said. It was disconnected. I changed it 8 months ago. She hadn't changed it for any reason connected to this. She'd changed it because her previous landlord had it and she'd moved. But she didn't explain that because explaining it would make it sound like she'd been avoiding something, and she hadn't been. She'd simply been living her life in the way of someone who had handed something over to the appropriate authorities years ago and then accepted slowly and bitterly that the appropriate authorities had done nothing with it. Ms. Vasquez, Forsyth said from the door. Are you aware of a Dr. Gerald Spann? The name landed in the room with the particular weight of names that carry histories. Emily was aware of it. She'd been aware of it for 4 years. Yes, she said. He's under federal investigation, Webb said. Has been for 6 weeks. His name came up in connection with a series of fraudulent medical evaluations, working dogs, primarily retired military. The evaluation that cleared Titan 14 months ago was conducted under his oversight. Cole made a sound that wasn't quite a word. We've been building the case for several months, Forsyth continued, and we've hit a documentation gap. Spann's digital records go back 3 years. But the pattern we're seeing, the methodology, the specific way the falsifications are structured, it's consistent with practices that predate his current operation by at least 5 years. She paused. Your name came up in a secondary record, a complaint filed approximately 4 years ago. I filed it, Emily said. With the Military Veterinary Review Board, Webb confirmed. And they buried it. Webb didn't confirm that directly. He picked up his pen, set it down. The complaint was logged, reviewed internally, and closed. The reviewing officer noted insufficient evidence. I had sufficient evidence, Emily said. The evenness in her voice was the kind that came from having been angry about something for long enough that the anger had composted into something more durable. I had documentation of 11 evaluations across a 14-month period, clearances issued for animals with observable, diagnosable conditions. I had records of the evaluating veterinarians, timestamps on the clearances, and in 4 cases I had imaging that directly contradicted the stated outcomes. We know, Forsyth said. That's why we're here. Cole had been looking at Emily with an expression that had stopped being complicated and become something simpler. Not betrayal. He hadn't known her long enough for that. More like the recalibration of a person discovering that the ground they were standing on was further above sea level than they'd thought. You reported this 4 years ago, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And they closed it. Yes. And Titan was evaluated after it was closed. Emily looked at him. Yes. He turned away from her and looked at the wall, and the hand on Titan's flank pressed down slightly, unconsciously. Titan didn't react. He just leaned back. Webb opened his folder and removed a single printed sheet, turned it to face Emily on the desk. We recovered a partial record set during a separate audit 6 weeks ago. It references your complaint. It also references an internal memo recommending that the complaint not be forwarded to the Oversight Committee. He pointed to a line near the bottom of the page. The memo was authored by someone in the chain between your filing and the review board. The signature is redacted in the copy we recovered, but the authoring office is listed. Emily looked at the page. Her expression didn't change, but her jaw moved very slightly, the way someone's does when they've read something that confirms something they already knew, and somehow that's worse than being wrong. You knew the name, Forsyth said quietly. I knew the office, Emily said. I didn't have the specific person. I had a guess. We need whatever documentation you retained from that period, Webb said. The complaint you filed was logged, but the supporting materials, the imaging records, the evaluation files, they're not attached to the archive complaint. The archive shows they were received and then removed. We need to know if you kept copies. Emily was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that isn't the absence of something but the presence of a decision being made carefully. I kept copies, she said. Webb and Forsyth exchanged a look that was brief and controlled and said several things in the vocabulary of people who communicated in compressed signals. Everything? Forsyth asked. Everything I had when I filed. plus some additional documentation I gathered in the 6 months after the complaint was closed, while I was still in a position to gather it. A pause. Before I wasn't. That last part she said without elaboration, and nobody pushed it. Not yet. Where is it? Webb asked. Not here, Emily said. I'll need to retrieve it. How soon can... Tonight, she said. I can have it tonight. Deborah was waiting in the hallway outside the reading room when Emily came out, which meant Deborah had been standing in the hallway for somewhere between 15 and 25 minutes, which meant she'd been listening to as much as she could through the door and had not been satisfied with what she'd managed to catch. The expression on her face was the controlled version of something considerably less controlled. Who are those peoples? She asked, dropping her voice. Federal investigators, Emily said, continuing to walk. Emily. Deborah moved to keep pace, which required a small, undignified adjustment of her stride. The hospital administration needs to be informed if federal investigators are on the premises. They're here to see me, not the hospital. You're on hospital grounds, which means Deborah. Emily stopped walking and turned to look at her directly. This was unusual enough that Deborah actually stopped talking. Emily didn't often make direct eye contact during these interactions. She usually let Deborah's monologues run their course because resistance cost time and energy she needed for other things. But the morning had shifted something, and she was no longer interested in managing Deborah's anxiety on Deborah's schedule. Whatever you're worried about, I'd suggest you speak to the hospital's legal team before you speak to me, and I'd suggest you do it before the end of business today. She walked away before Deborah could formulate an answer. Cole was coming out of the reading room with Titan at his heel when she rounded the corner back toward the exam wing. He fell into step beside her without being asked, which she noticed but didn't comment on. Titan was moving more slowly than he had when he'd arrived. The adrenaline had burned out, and the underlying pain was reasserting itself. Emily adjusted her pace without thinking about it. How much of it do you still have? Cole asked. All of it. He was quiet for a few steps. Why'd you keep it? She thought about that question. She'd thought about it before, in the early months after leaving, when keeping the files had felt like insisting on something nobody was interested in hearing, and later when it had felt more like carrying something she didn't know how to put down. Because I was right, she said finally, and being right without evidence is just being a person with an opinion. Cole looked at her sideways. You've been carrying this for 4 years and working here. Yes. Doing wound care and mobility assessments on cattle dogs. Among other things. He stopped walking. She took 2 more steps and then stopped too, turning back toward him. Titan sat down between them with the equanimity of an animal who had stopped trying to understand human pauses. Why? Cole said. Not why you kept the files. Why are you here? Because what I watched you do in that lobby, what you found in 20 minutes on my dog, that's not someone who belongs in this facility doing the work you're doing, so why are you here? She looked at him for a moment. It was a real question asked without aggression, and it deserved something closer to a real answer than she usually gave. Because after I filed the complaint and it went nowhere, I left military service, she said. And I had a nursing license and I needed to work. And Creston Falls was where I ended up. She paused. There's not a complicated reason. I was tired, I needed a salary, and nobody here asked me questions I didn't want to answer. Until today. Until today, she agreed. They stood in the hallway for a moment with that hanging between them. Then Emily turned and kept walking, and Cole came with her, and Titan got up and came too. She got Titan settled into a monitored recovery bay with a pain management protocol she'd documented 3 times in the system. Once in the primary chart, once in the nursing notes, and once in a flag that would ping Dr. Sandoval's office in Cheyenne with the imaging attached. She did this with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had learned not to trust that anything existed unless it existed in multiple places. Cole sat in the chair beside the bay. He'd called someone. She'd heard part of the conversation from the hallway, his voice low and controlled, the specific tone of a person conveying serious information without letting the seriousness become noise. She hadn't listened. It wasn't her business. She was in the middle of updating Titan's file when one of the younger techs, a 23-year-old named Priya, who had been at Harlow for 8 months and still had the specific optimism of someone who hadn't been worn down yet, appeared at her elbow. "Doctor, Ostrander wants to see you," Priya said, and then, because she was 23 and still hadn't learned to keep her face entirely neutral. "He seems kind of, I don't know, stressed." "Okay," Emily said. She finished the notation she was in the middle of, saved it, and then went. Ostrander's office was at the end of the east corridor, past the surgical wing, in the part of the building that got good afternoon light and had been allocated to people whose names appeared on the donor plaque in the lobby. He was behind his desk when she arrived, and he'd done something with his face that was meant to convey authority, but was reading, in the specific way things read when you knew what to look for, as anxiety wearing authority's clothes. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "There are federal agents in my hospital." "In the hospital's reading room," she said. "Specifically." "Emily." He put his hands on the desk, pressed flat, the gesture of a person trying to find solid ground. "Whatever you've gotten yourself involved in, I filed a complaint 4 years ago regarding fraudulent military working dog evaluations," she said. "The complaint was suppressed. The investigators are here because they've reopened the underlying case and they need documentation I retained from that period." Ostrander stared at her. He processed this with the visible effort of a man who had walked into a conversation expecting to manage a minor institutional inconvenience and discovered it was considerably heavier than advertised. "You filed a federal complaint," he said slowly. "A complaint with the Military Veterinary Review Board, yes. With federal implications, yes. While you were working here?" "No, before I was working here. But the evidence is relevant to a current federal investigation, and the investigators are here to obtain it." He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his desk, at the neat piles of documentation he'd assembled from other people's work, at the framed degree from a university in Colorado that cost considerably more than Emily's had. Does this create any liability for the hospital?" There it was. She'd wondered how long it would take to get there. "I don't believe so," she said, "unless there's something about the hospital's own practices you're concerned about." His jaw tightened. "That's not what I meant." "Then I think you're fine," she said. She turned toward the door. "I should get back to my patient." "Emily." He said her name with the inflection of someone who had never quite looked at her and was beginning to realize they'd spent 3 years not looking at something significant. "The imaging you pulled this morning, on the Navarro dog." She waited. That was good catch," he said. The words came out with the specific labor of a man who did not often have occasion to give Emily Vasquez a genuine compliment and was therefore not practiced at it. She looked at him for a moment. "It was a year-old fracture that had been called a clean bill of health," she said. "It wasn't a catch. It was a minimum." She left his office and went back to work. The afternoon went the way afternoons at Harlow usually went. Too much to do, not enough hands, the specific rhythm of patient care that didn't stop because the institutional ground had shifted under everyone's feet. Emily managed Titan's first post-assessment pain cycle, completed 2 other cases that had been waiting since morning, and ate half of a sandwich standing in the break room at 2:20. Priya came in halfway through and looked like she wanted to ask something and then didn't. Carol from reception had apparently recovered sufficiently to begin circulating a version of the morning's events that emphasized the dog and minimized Emily's role, which was standard. Webb and Forsyth had left around noon with an appointment to return the following morning. Before they'd gone, Webb had given Emily a number and a case reference code and said, with the particular care of a federal investigator who had learned not to make promises, that her documentation would be handled carefully. She'd written the number down on the back of a notepad page because she didn't want it in her phone, which was a habit that came from somewhere she didn't often think about. Cole had stayed. That was the part she hadn't anticipated. He wasn't in the way. She'd expected him to be the kind of man who managed anxiety through presence and proximity, which was its own kind of problem in a clinical environment. Instead, he was in the chair beside Titan's bay, doing something on his phone with the focused quiet of someone working. And when Emily came back from rounds, he looked up and said, "How's his color?" Which was, she noted, a reasonable clinical question from someone who had spent years monitoring working dogs in the field. "Good," she said. "Pain management is holding." "Good," he said. Then, "Can I ask you something?" She was charting. She kept charting. "You can ask." "The complaint, the one 4 years ago." He set the phone down. "What happened to you after it was closed, professionally?" She kept writing for another moment. Then she set the stylus down. "I was asked to leave my position," she said. "Not fired, asked. There's a difference in the paperwork, but not in what it was." "No," she said. "Not in what it was." Cole was quiet. "Someone knew the complaint was yours." "Yes." "Someone in the chain between your filing and the review board." "That's what I believe." He looked at Titan, who was sleeping with the deep, pharmacologically assisted sleep of an animal finally in less pain than it had been in for a very long time. "I've been working at that demonstration facility for 6 months," he said, "putting him through drills, load-bearing exercises, because they told me he was clear." "I know. And the people who told me he was clear are presumably people Dr. Spann worked with or for," she said, "or both. That's what the investigation will determine." Cole nodded, slowly. "When they get your documentation." "Yes." He looked at her with the expression she'd been seeing all day in different iterations. That ongoing recalibration, the assessment revising itself as new information came in. "You weren't surprised," he said. "When they walked in this morning, you were something, but not surprised." She thought about how to answer that. "I've been waiting for this case to go somewhere for 4 years," she said. "I was surprised it was today. I wasn't surprised it happened." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the bay, somewhere in the corridor, someone was moving a cart that needed its wheels looked at. The specific irregular squeak of it marked the passage of time in a way that was almost meditative after enough years. Titan's monitoring equipment beeped softly. The afternoon light through the high window in the bay had shifted from white to something slightly warmer. "Why Creston Falls?" Cole asked. "What?" "Of all the places to land, this town, this facility," he gestured generally. "Why here?" She picked up the stylus again. "My mother lives 40 minutes north of here," she said. "She's not well. I needed to be close." It was the truth, and it surprised her slightly to say it to him, because it was the kind of truth that was personal rather than professional, and she'd kept those things in different rooms for a long time. He didn't react to it with the specific sympathetic overreach that personal truths sometimes generated. He just nodded, once, like a person filing information appropriately. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She went back to charting. It was at 20 to 5 that the day's second rupture happened. Emily was finishing the afternoon handoff notes at the nursing station when Deborah appeared for the third time. But this Deborah was different from the morning Deborah. The morning Deborah had been defensive and territorial. This Deborah was carefully composed in the way of someone who had spent the afternoon on the phone with people above her own pay grade and had arrived at a decision. She set a piece of paper on the desk beside Emily's tablet. Emily looked at it. It was printed on hospital letterhead. It had Deborah's signature at the bottom and the hospital director's signature above it, which meant Deborah had escalated this to a level Emily hadn't anticipated by afternoon. "Effective immediately, sir," Deborah said, in the voice she used when she was reading from a script she'd prepared. "You're being placed on administrative suspension pending a review of this morning's events." Emily didn't pick up the paper. She read it where it lay. "On what grounds?" "Unauthorized communication of preliminary diagnostic findings to a client without physician oversight, and conduct creating potential institutional liability." Deborah folded her hands. "The hospital director has determined that given the federal presence and the nature of what was discussed this morning, it's in the institution's best interest to pause your involvement in the relevant case and conduct an internal review." Emily sat with that for a moment. She'd felt this kind of thing before. The shape of it was familiar, the formal language, the inverted logic, The institution protecting itself by removing the person who'd done something true and inconvenient. It was the same shape as 4 years ago, dressed in different clothes. Titan is my patient, she said. Dr. Ostrander will assume Titan's care. I've already made a referral to an orthopedic specialist in Cheyenne. That referral will be reviewed before it proceeds. Emily looked at the paper. She looked at Deborah. She thought about several things she could say and said none of them. She picked up her tablet, saved everything she'd been working on, logged out, and stood up. Emily, Deborah said, and there was something almost uncertain in it, which was new. This isn't... The hospital has to protect itself. You understand that. I understand what you're doing, Emily said. She picked up her bag from beneath the desk. I don't think it's the same thing. She walked to the exit that led to the parking lot, passing the corridor to Titan's Bay on her way. Cole was in the hall outside it, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and he straightened when he saw her carrying her bag with the particular quality of someone who had just had the building removed from under them. He looked at her. He looked at the bag. He looked at her face. Tell me they didn't just... Administrative suspension, she said. She kept walking. They've assigned Ostrander to Titan. Emily. He pushed off the wall and came after her. You can't... They can't just... They can, she said. They did. The investigators, he said. Webb and Forsyth, call them. This is... It's not illegal, she said. It's just what institutions do. She pushed through the door and the late afternoon air of Creston Falls hit her, cool, thin, carrying the particular smell of a town at elevation that had just moved past the heat of the day. She stopped on the pavement and took a breath. Cole came through the door behind her. He stood beside her on the pavement, and they both looked at the parking lot for a moment, which was a prosaic thing to look at for a moment of this kind, but it was what was in front of them. You said you have the files at home, he said. Yes. Webb wants them tomorrow morning. Yes. Okay. He shifted his weight. I'm going to make a call tonight, he said. There are people I've worked with who have standing to make inquiries about a federal investigation that implicates a military evaluation. People with some institutional reach. Emily turned to look at him. You don't have to do that. My dog has a year-old fracture, he said, and the nurse who found it just got suspended for finding it. His voice was still even. It was the evenness of something compressed to a point where it was very, very dense. I have to do something, and I'd rather it be something useful. She looked at him for a moment. The light was going amber at the edges of the parking lot, the way it did in Wyoming at this time of year when the sky had real estate to work with. She was tired in the specific way of someone who had been carrying something heavy all day on top of the weight they carried every day. Her shoulder hurt where she'd pulled something catching a cage door that morning and hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She walked to her car. She drove home. She pulled into the parking lot of her apartment building, went upstairs, fed the cat that had appeared at her door 8 months ago and never left, and stood in her kitchen for a moment with her hands on the counter. Then she went to the hall closet, moved a winter coat and a box of tax documents to the side, and pulled out a gray fireproof document case that she had carried from 3 apartments across 4 years and had never opened in front of anyone. She set it on the kitchen table. She unlatched it. The files were exactly as she'd left them, organized, labeled, each folder in sequence by date and evaluation ID. She pulled the top folder and opened it, looking at the first page, which was a copy of a veterinary clearance certificate with a date stamp and a veterinarian's signature, and, in the lower right corner, an authorization code she had cross-referenced against internal records she shouldn't have had access to and definitely shouldn't have kept. She looked at the authorization code. She turned to her laptop, opened it, and pulled up the case reference number Webb had given her. Then she opened the second folder in the sequence, and the third. She was building the sequence back in her head. The order she'd presented in, the documents that established timeline, the ones that established pattern, the ones that established the link between falsified evaluations, and the authorization chain above the evaluating veterinarians. She was 3 folders in when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, local area code, not the number Webb had given her, not Cole's number, not anyone she'd spoken to today. She almost let it go to voicemail. She picked it up on the 4th ring instead. Some instinct she couldn't name making the decision before she did. Ms. Vasquez? The voice was male, measured, the specific measured quality of someone who had cultivated calm as a professional tool. I think you know why I'm calling. She didn't answer immediately. She was looking at the folder in front of her, at the authorization code in the lower right corner, and connecting the voice to a name she'd been sitting next to for 4 years without knowing it. I think I do, she said. Those files, the voice said, whatever you have, you need to understand something about where this goes if you hand them over. Where does it go? She said. Her voice was steady. It goes somewhere very complicated for some people who have done a great deal to ensure certain things stay quiet, he said. People who are patient and who have demonstrated, I think you'll agree, some capacity for reach. Emily looked at the document case on her table, at the 4 years of careful, systematic, quietly maintained records stacked in sequence in the case, at the cat sitting on the far end of the table watching her with the comprehensive indifference of a creature with no investment in human institutional corruption. I filed a complaint 4 years ago, she said, properly, through the correct channels, with full documentation, and someone in your chain removed my supporting materials from the archive, closed the complaint without review, and then made sure I lost my position. She paused. Is that approximately correct? Silence. Then, you're not someone who should be making enemies, Ms. Vasquez. No, she said. I'm someone who already has them. She moved the folder to the side and opened the next one. And I've had 4 years to make sure that doesn't matter. She heard the quality of the silence change. It was a very specific change. The silence of someone realizing that what they thought was a manageable problem was attached to something considerably larger. Those files belong to no one, Emily said. They're copies. They've always been copies. She paused. You're calling me because you already know what's in them. The line went quiet. And then, in the background of the call, barely audible, the kind of detail you only catch if you're listening for it, she heard a second voice. Not on the phone. In the room with whoever was calling her, a voice saying 2 words, sharp and urgent. He's here. The line went dead. Emily set the phone down on the table. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she picked it up and called the number Webb had given her, which went to voicemail. And she left a message that was 4 sentences long and contained no speculation, only the fact of the call, the approximate duration, the one identifiable phrase she'd caught in the background, and the time. Then she sat down at the kitchen table with the open document case and her laptop, and the cat sitting at the far end like a small, indifferent witness, and she began to go through the files from the beginning, because whoever had just called her had made one very significant mistake. They'd called her from a local number. They were somewhere in or near Creston Falls, and they'd done it tonight, within hours of the federal investigators leaving Harlow, which meant they had a source inside the building who had told them what had happened today, and they were scared enough to move quickly, and people who moved quickly when they were scared made errors. She was on the 7th folder when her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Cole. She picked it up. I made that call, he said. The people I mentioned. And? He was quiet for a beat that had a texture to it. Emily, he said, who was Gerald Spann's supervising officer during the period your complaint was filed? She knew the answer. She'd known the approximate answer for 4 years and the specific answer for approximately 40 minutes, since she'd looked at the authorization code in the lower right corner of the first clearance certificate and cross-referenced it against the things she'd never quite been able to prove until tonight. Why? She said. Because the people I called, Cole said slowly, just told me that the name attached to the suppressed memo, the one Webb mentioned this morning, the redacted signature, they pulled a copy through a different channel, an unredacted copy. Emily's hand had gone very still on the table. The name on that memo, Cole said, is someone who is currently active, currently in a position with access to federal veterinary procurement contracts. And Emily, he stopped, exhaled. He's in Wyoming. He's been in Wyoming for the last 3 days attending a regional review board session. The kitchen was very quiet. That's who called me, Emily said. Not a question. What? 20 minutes ago, she said. Unknown number, local area code, someone trying to tell me to stop. The silence on Cole's end had weight to it. "Emily," he said, "he knows where you are." She looked at the document case on the table, at the 7 open folders, at the phone in her hand and the locked apartment door across the room, and the window above the kitchen sink that showed the parking lot below in the amber wash of the security light. In the parking lot, a car she didn't recognize was parked at the far end, engine off, lights off, and it hadn't been there when she'd pulled in. Her hand tightened on the phone. "Cole," she said, "I need you to call Webb. Right now. Tell him the case is more active than he knows." "Where are you?" "My apartment." She was already on her feet, the document case in one hand, the cat retreating under the couch with the accurate animal instinct for when a human's energy has changed. "I'm going to be somewhere else in about 4 minutes. Emily, call Webb," she said. "I'll call you when I'm moving." She ended the call. She picked up the document case. She grabbed her keys and her bag, and she went to the door and stopped with her hand on the lock and made herself take one breath, just one, measured, the kind she'd learned to take in situations where the wrong kind of fast was worse than slightly slower. And then she opened the door and moved into the hallway. The hallway was empty. The elevator was on a different floor. She took the stairs. She was on the second landing when she heard the building's front entrance open below her. Unhurried footsteps. One set. Moving toward the stairs. She kept moving. One hand on the rail, the document case pressed against her chest, and 4 years of carefully maintained records between her and a man who had spent those same 4 years believing she'd given up. She came out the side exit at a near run, the document case tucked under her left arm, gravel shifting under her shoes in the narrow alley between the building and the laundry facility next door. The security light on the back corner of the building gave her enough to navigate by, and not enough to feel safe under. She moved toward the street, not the parking lot. The parking lot was where the car was, and the car was the problem. Her phone buzzed in her hand. "Cole." She answered it without stopping. "Webb's not picking up," he said. "I've left 2 messages. I'm calling Forsyth." "The man who called me is in my building," she said. "One set of footsteps, stairwell. I'm out the side." "Where are you going?" She was already making the calculation. Her car was compromised, or she was treating it as compromised, which was the same thing operationally. Her apartment was behind her. Preston Falls had one police precinct that was 12 minutes away if you drove at the speed limit, which she was not going to do. "Is there anywhere you can be in the next 8 minutes?" she asked. "I'm at the Days Inn on Garfield," he said immediately. 6 minutes if I drive." "Don't drive. Walk. Go to the 24-hour diner on the corner of Garfield and 5th, the one with the blue awning. I'll come to you." "Emily?" "Walk fast," she said, and cut the call. She made it to the street, turned north, and didn't run because running on a residential sidewalk at 9:30 at night was a signal, and she didn't want to be a signal. She walked fast, the document case against her ribs, the night air cold enough at this elevation that her breath was just barely visible. Her shoulder, the one she'd pulled that morning and hadn't mentioned, was complaining about the case's weight in a way she filed under irrelevant. She covered 3 blocks before she looked back. Nobody behind her. Either the footsteps in the stairwell had been a tenant, or she'd moved fast enough, or whoever it was had made the smarter choice and gone back to the car. The car was the part she couldn't account for. If there was a second person in the car, the geometry of this changed. She turned onto 5th and saw the diner's blue awning half a block down. She pushed through the door into the smell of coffee and fryer oil and the low murmur of a place that served night shift workers and insomniacs and college students, and she found the table farthest from the windows and sat with her back to the wall and the document case on her lap beneath the table. The waitress came. Emily ordered coffee she didn't want because sitting without ordering was conspicuous. Cole came through the door 4 minutes later, moving with the contained urgency of someone who had covered 6 city blocks quickly without attracting attention. He was in jeans and a jacket, no tie. He'd been in his room, she registered. He'd been sitting in his room, and he'd come when she called, and she noted that without making anything of it. He slid into the seat across from her and took in the table, the case in her lap, her face. He didn't ask if she was okay, which she appreciated. "Forsyth picked up," he said. "She's contacting Webb. They're sending a local contact to your building." "Okay." "She wants the files tonight." "She can have them tonight." Emily looked at the door, at the windows. The man who called me. The name from the memo. Did your contact give you a name or just the office? A name, Cole said. He turned his coffee cup over, righted it, left it empty. Deputy Administrator Lawrence Voss. He's been in the procurement chain for 12 years, my contact said. Maybe more. Emily sat very still. You know the name, Cole said. I know the name, she said. He wasn't... When I filed the complaint, I didn't have enough on him specifically. I had the authorization code from the evaluations, and I had the office, but I couldn't get to the name without access I'd already lost. She set her hand flat on the table. He's the reason I lost it. Cole looked at her hand. He didn't say anything for a moment. How high does 12 years of procurement access get you? High enough, she said, that when an investigator pulls the financial records behind those evaluations, they're not going to find one contractor. They're going to find a structure. Voss at the top, Span in the operational layer, and a series of contracted evaluators underneath who were signing off on clearances that came back formatted to pass automatic review even when the underlying animals were compromised. She paused. That's the part I couldn't prove 4 years ago. I had the pattern, but not the mechanism. Now they have Span's records, and they have my documentation of the historical evaluations, and they have... She stopped. What? Cole said. They have a phone call, she said slowly. Voss called me from a local number tonight. A local number means a local SIM, or a local landline. If it's traceable, it puts him in Creston Falls making contact with a federal witness hours after investigators accessed records connected to his office. She looked at Cole. That's not a person being careful. That's a person who panicked. Cole leaned back in his chair slightly. Because of today. Because of Titan, she said. Because Titan wasn't supposed to come here. Wasn't supposed to get a second assessment. The original plan, if you can call it that, was that he'd retire, do demonstration work, eventually be retired fully, and nobody would ever go back and image that hip. The evaluation would just be a record in a file. She exhaled. He walked through those doors this morning and sat down next to me, and the whole thing started unraveling. Cole was quiet for a moment that had several layers to it. Then, I want to be at the handoff tonight, when you give them the files. You don't need to be. I know I don't need to be, he said. She looked at him across the table. He meant it the way he said it. Not as protection, not as management, as presence. She'd been alone with this for 4 years. She was tired in a way she was only now starting to feel the full weight of, now that she'd finally stopped moving and sat down in a diner on 5th Street with coffee she didn't want and a document case on her lap that had been waiting 4 years for exactly tonight. Okay, she said. Forsyth arrived 22 minutes later with a second agent Emily hadn't met before. They took the corner table and Emily transferred the files, all of them, every folder, organized in the sequence she'd built over the course of the evening, across the diner table with the specific, careful attention of someone who had kept these things safe for a very long time and was now trusting the transfer to be the right decision. Forsyth went through the top folder with her reading glasses on and her face professionally neutral, and then she turned to the authorization codes Emily had flagged in the lower right corners, and she stopped. She looked up at Emily. These codes, she said, you cross-referenced these. Yes. Against internal procurement records. Yes. Records you shouldn't have had access to. No, Emily said. Records I had legitimate access to at the time, as part of my role, and retained copies of when I left. The access was legitimate. The retention was, she paused, a decision I made. Forsyth looked at her for a long moment. Something passed across her face that wasn't quite a smile. These codes tie directly to Voss's authorization chain, she said. If these are authentic, they're authentic. If they're authenticated through our channels, Forsyth said carefully, they close the gap we've been sitting on for 6 weeks. She set the folder down. Miss Vasquez, I need to ask you, the phone call tonight. You said you heard a second voice. 2 words, Emily said. He's here. In the room with the caller. Yes. Forsyth and the second agent exchanged a look. We pulled the registration on the car in your parking lot, Forsyth said. It came back to a rental. The rental came back to a corporate account associated with a regional review board. She set her pen down. Lawrence Voss checked out of his hotel this afternoon, approximately 2 hours after we left Harlow. Cole had gone very still beside Emily. He moved, Emily said. We've been trying to locate him for the last 3 hours, Forsyth said. She said it evenly, with the professional composure of a person delivering information that was also, underneath, an acknowledgement that something had slipped. The local contact we sent to your building. They found the stairwell and the side exit, but the parking lot was clear by the time they arrived. The rental is still unaccounted for. Emily sat with that. She looked at the document case, now open on the table, with its contents transferred to Forsyth's evidence envelope. 4 years of careful, methodical, quietly maintained documentation. It was out of her hands now, which was what she'd wanted. It was exactly what she'd wanted. He knows I gave you the files, she said. He would assume it, Forsyth said. After tonight, yes. Which means the window is narrowing, Forsyth said. Which is why we're moving on Spann's office tonight. Warrant's already being executed, but Voss is... She stopped. Emily's phone lit up on the table. The screen showed an incoming call from a number she did not recognize. Not local area code this time. Different state entirely. But the pattern of it, the timing, the particular quality of her own instinct pulling alert, made her pick it up. She answered. The voice that came through was not Lawrence Voss. It was someone she had not spoken to in 4 years. Someone whose name was on 2 of the folders she'd just handed to Forsyth as a corroborating witness. Someone who had been present at 3 of the 11 fraudulent evaluations she'd documented and had, when she'd last spoken to him, been too scared to confirm anything to anyone. Emily, the voice said. It's Darren Cole. She hadn't thought of that name in months. Her hand tightened on the phone. I know I have no right to call you, Cole said. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept in several days. But Voss reached out to me tonight, an hour ago. He told me the investigation had found the files, and he told me... Cole stopped. He told me what I needed to do to stay out of it. What did he tell you to do? Emily said. Forsyth was watching her with sharp, focused attention. He told me to call the investigators, Cole said, and tell them the evaluations were your idea, that you were the one who structured the falsifications, that you came to him 4 years ago with a scheme to inflate the evaluation outcomes in exchange for a share of the contract savings. The diner was very quiet around Emily, in the way that the world sometimes went quiet when something arrived that required the full bandwidth of a person's attention to process. He told you to frame me, she said. Yes. Cole's voice was thin. And I'm not going to. That's why I'm calling. Emily looked at Forsyth. Forsyth had already picked up her own phone. Darren, Emily said carefully, where are you right now? A pause. The sound of wind somewhere behind him, outside or near an open window. I'm in my car, he said. I've been driving for 40 minutes. I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't sure who was... Listen to me, Emily said. The investigators who are handling this case are with me right now. I'm going to put one of them on. Her name is Agent Forsyth. You're going to tell her exactly what you just told me, and you're going to tell her where you are. Emily, if Voss finds out Darren, she kept her voice even. He already made his move. Yours is the one that matters now. Silence. She could hear his breathing, uneven, the breathing of a man at the edge of something. Then, okay, he said. Okay. Emily handed the phone to Forsyth. She sat back in the diner chair and looked at the table and thought about Lawrence Voss, somewhere in Creston Falls tonight, in an unaccounted-for rental car, who had just tried to use his last available piece and had instead put his last witness in contact with the people who would dismantle everything he'd built. Cole was watching her. What just happened? He said quietly. Emily reached for her coffee, which was cold. He panicked, she said, and he made the wrong call. Her phone was still in Forsyth's hand. Forsyth was speaking in low, rapid sentences, taking down an address, signaling to the second agent. The investigation that had been moving in one direction for 6 weeks had just broken open in a completely different place, and somewhere in the structure of it, a name that had been redacted for 4 years was now attached to a man making very bad decisions in a rented car. and then Forsyth lowered the phone. She looked at Emily with an expression Emily had not seen on her face before. Cole says Voss told him one more thing tonight, Forsyth said slowly. He told him there was a second memo, one that didn't go through the review board, one that went directly to a congressional liaison office. She paused. Emily, how many evaluations did you document? 11, Emily said, across 14 months. Call is saying the total number is closer to 60, Forsyth said, over 7 years. And the authorization on the later ones, it doesn't stop at Voss. The diner hummed around them. The coffee machine behind the counter made a sound. Somewhere outside, a truck moved down 5th Street. Emily sat very, very still. How far up does it go? Cole said. Forsyth set the phone on the table. She looked at both of them with the expression of a person who had just found out the building was considerably taller than the blueprints had indicated. That, she said, is what we need to find out. Tonight. The word tonight hung in the air of the diner for exactly 2 seconds before Forsyth was already moving. Phone back to her ear, her free hand gesturing to the second agent with the compressed economy of someone who communicated in signals her colleagues read without translation. Emily watched her and felt the specific quality of a situation that had been in one gear for 4 years suddenly shift into something faster than she was entirely prepared for, even though she'd been preparing for it the whole time. Cole leaned forward across the table. 60 evaluations, he said quietly. 7 years. At minimum, Emily said. Cole was only involved in the later period. He wouldn't know the full scope. And a congressional liaison. Someone who received a memo directly. That's not the same as being involved. It could be notification rather than authorization. She paused. But it could also not be. Cole looked at her. You're very calm right now. I'm not, she said. I'm just quiet about it. He nodded, once, like that was an answer he understood from the inside. Forsyth came back to the table and sat down with the movement of someone who had 7 things in motion and was allocating attention between them with surgical precision. Call is at a gas station off Route 9, about 14 miles out, she said. We're sending someone to him now. He's agreed to a formal interview tonight. She looked at Emily. The warrant on Span's office is being expanded based on what Call's told us about the volume and timeline. We're pulling financial records from the procurement office going back 8 years. The congressional liaison, Emily said. We're treating that carefully, Forsyth said. Call heard Voss mention it, but he doesn't have a name. He has a description of the memo, handwritten cover note, not digitized, sent through internal courier rather than the standard documentation chain. Which means someone was aware enough of the digital trail to work around it, Emily said. Yes. Forsyth set her hands flat on the table. What I need to know right now, Emily, and I'm asking you specifically because you've had 4 years to think about the architecture of this, is whether the falsified evaluations were primarily about the contractor payments or whether there was a secondary benefit. Emily had thought about this. She'd thought about it a great deal in the years since she'd first seen the pattern in the clearance data, and she'd arrived at an answer she'd never been able to fully prove but had never stopped believing. Both, she said. The contractor payments were the mechanism. The secondary benefit was managing retirement timelines. Military working dogs with serious injuries should be retired and given medical care. Retiring them costs money and generates paperwork and occasionally generates public attention when the dogs are well known. Clearing them instead means they stay in operational or demonstration roles. The retirement costs don't hit the budget line, and the contractor who runs the evaluations gets paid for a clean clearance rather than a complicated one. Forsyth was quiet for a moment. You're describing a system where animals were kept in active roles while injured because their retirement was a budget inconvenience. And the contractor was incentivized to find them fit rather than not, Emily said. Yes. The second agent, who had been on his own phone in the corner, came back and bent down near Forsyth's ear. Emily watched his expression as he spoke. Controlled, professional, but with something underneath it that registered as significant. Forsyth listened, and her own expression went through a small, rapid recalibration that she smoothed out quickly. What? Cole said. Forsyth looked at Emily. The rental car, she said. It was found 20 minutes ago, Parked behind a law office on Creston Main Street. Engine off. Empty. He went to a lawyer, Cole said. The law office is closed, Forsyth said. He's not with a lawyer. He left the car there. She paused. He's on foot somewhere in downtown Creston Falls. Emily looked at the diner window. The street outside was quiet at this hour. A gas station across the way, a closed hardware store, the particular stillness of a small Wyoming town at 10 in the evening. He's not running, she said slowly. If he were running, he'd keep the car. No, Forsyth agreed. He's waiting for something, Emily said. Or someone. Or he's trying to access something he can't access remotely, Forsyth said. She looked at Emily steadily. Is there anything connected to this case that's physically located in Creston Falls? Something he might need to reach or destroy before we get to it? Emily went very still. She thought about the authorization codes, about the cross-reference procurement records, about the fact that she'd retained copies. She'd always had copies, but copies implied originals, and originals implied provenance, and provenance implied that somewhere in a record system there was a trail she hadn't been able to access 4 years ago, but that someone with Voss's level of procurement authority might know exactly where to find. The Military Review Board Regional Office, she said. There's one in Creston Falls, on Wheeler Avenue. It's a satellite office. It handles regional evaluation submissions and maintains physical archives for the Wyoming district going back 12 years. Forsyth was already on her feet. The physical archives would include original evaluation submissions, Emily said, pre-digital records for the first 3 years of the pattern, the period I have documentation on from my own files, but not the originals. If Voss needs to get to something before you do, it's there, Forsyth said. She was already moving, phone up, speaking in the rapid shorthand of someone coordinating positions. The second agent was with her. She paused at the diner door and looked back. Stay here, she said. Both of you. Someone will be back for you within the hour. She was out the door before Emily could answer. Cole looked at Emily. Emily looked at the empty table where the document case had been. The waitress came by, refilled coffee neither of them had touched, and left without a word. She told us to stay here, Cole said. She did, Emily said. A pause. Are you going to? He asked. She thought about Titan in a bay at Harlow, sedated and finally in less pain. She thought about the document case that was now in a federal evidence envelope. She thought about Lawrence Voss, somewhere in the 4 blocks between a parked rental car and a records archive on Wheeler Avenue, making the calculation of a man who had run out of good options and was now in the territory of bad ones. She thought about Gerald Spann's first falsified clearance certificate, the date on it, the authorization code in the lower right corner, and the animal whose clearance it represented. A 4-year-old Belgian shepherd named in the record only by her registry number, who had been cleared for continued patrol work with an untreated ligament injury and had been euthanized 18 months later when the injury progressed beyond intervention. No, she said. She picked up her bag. Are you? Cole was already standing. Wheeler Avenue was 6 blocks from the diner, which was 6 blocks of cold Wyoming night air, and the specific alertness that came from moving toward something rather than away from it. Emily set the pace. Quick, deliberate, not running. Cole matched it without commentary. They didn't talk. There wasn't anything to say that would be more useful than attention. The Military Review Board satellite office occupied the ground floor of a 2-story brick building that also housed a surveying company and an insurance agency, both dark at this hour. The MRB office itself had a frosted glass door with the agency seal and a set of standard commercial locks. The lights inside were off. They were half a block out when Emily saw the door. It was open, not wide, a few inches, the door resting against the frame without latching. From the street, in the dark, you'd miss it. Emily didn't miss it. She stopped walking. Cole stopped beside her. Forsyth, he said quietly. Call her, Emily said. Tell her the office is already open. He's inside. She was looking at the building's windows. First floor, both dark. Second floor above, unrelated office, also dark. The street was empty. I'm going to the door. Emily. I'm not going in, she said. I'm going to the door. She was already moving before she finished saying it, crossing the street at an angle, keeping out of the direct line of the doorway, coming at the building from the side. She heard Cole behind her, phone already up. She pressed herself to the brick wall beside the door and listened. Inside, the specific quality of a large room at night, the hum of a climate system, the particular acoustic flatness of a space with a lot of filing and very little soft surface. And underneath that, the sound of drawers. Systematic, controlled, not panicked. Someone who knew what they were looking for and where to find it. Cole came up beside her. "Forsyth is 4 minutes out," he breathed. "She said do not engage." Emily nodded. She was not going to engage. She was going to stand beside this door for 4 minutes and make sure that whatever Lawrence Voss was doing inside that office, he didn't finish it and leave by a rear exit before federal agents arrived to find an empty room and missing records. The drawer sounds stopped. A pause. Then paper sounds. The specific friction of archival documents being gathered, compressed, moved. "He's pulling records," Emily said very quietly. Cole's jaw was set. 4 minutes. "If he's burning them, he's not burning them," Cole said. "There's no smoke. He's taking them." Emily thought about this. Taking records from a federal archive was a serious crime regardless of what those records contained, which meant Voss was operating in the register of a person who had decided the alternative was worse. The alternative, from his perspective, was those records being accessed by investigators and added to the structure Emily's files had already established. Whatever was in there was worse than the crime of removing it, which meant it was significantly worse than what she already had. 3 minutes. The paper sounds moved, closer to the door, then shifting left, tracking toward what Emily assessed as a rear corridor. "He's going out the back," she said. Cole moved without discussion, immediately, back down the wall to the edge of the building and around the corner to assess the alley access. Emily stayed at the door. She was doing a calculation that she did not love. If Voss reached the rear exit and got into an alley before Forsyth arrived, the records went with him, and the document chain that connected the 17-page scope of the existing case to whatever larger structure Cole had described broke at a critical joint. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark except for the emergency exit sign above the rear door, which cast enough red-tinted light to navigate by. Filing cabinets lined both walls, floor to ceiling, each labeled with district codes and year ranges. A central table held a large brown expandable folder. Open, partially filled, documents stacked beside it. The rear door was at the far end, closed. Emily crossed the room in 12 steps, keeping her footfall quiet on the linoleum, and reached the expandable folder. She looked at the documents stacked beside it. A series of archival evaluation forms, original signatures, physical stamps, date ranges going back 9 years. She didn't touch them. She pulled out her phone and photographed them where they lay, fast and systematic, 6 frames covering all visible document faces, timestamps recording automatically. The rear door opened. She'd expected Voss to be coming back for the folder. She hadn't expected him to already be in the doorway when it opened, which meant he'd been in the rear corridor for reasons other than exiting, and now he was standing in the doorway with the expandable folder under his arm. He'd already had a portion of the documents, looking at Emily Vasquez standing at the central table with her phone in her hand. He was 61, gray at the temples, the build of a man who had been athletic once and hadn't entirely lost it. He was in civilian clothes, button down, dark jacket, and he looked, in the red-washed light, like a man who had been awake for a very long time and was operating now on something past adrenaline, something lower and more corrosive. He looked at Emily. He looked at her phone. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was the same measured voice from the phone call, the professional calm, though it was thinner now, the way a material gets thin when you've stretched it past its tolerance. "No," Emily agreed, "but here we are." He looked at the documents on the table. He looked at the folder under his arm. He was making the calculation, she could see it moving across his face, of a man assessing whether the situation was still manageable, whether he could take the documents, get past her, and still change the shape of what the investigators found. His eyes went to the rear door behind him, back to Emily. "Whatever you think those documents show," he said, You don't have the context. I have 11 years of context, she said. Some of it's already in federal evidence custody. His jaw tightened fractionally. You were a nurse at a regional facility, he said, with no authorization to access procurement records. Anything you retained is inadmissible. That's for a court to determine, she said. Not you, and not tonight. He stepped into the room, one step, then stopped. He was looking at her the way a person looks at something that has become more complicated than the briefing had indicated. And she recognized the look because she'd been on the other end of it before, at Harlow, in the corridor with Deborah, in the military office 4 years ago when she'd walked in with her complaint documentation, and a senior official had looked at her exactly this way, like she was an equation that wasn't supposed to have a solution. You ruined your career over this, he said, 4 years ago. You filed a complaint, you lost your position, you ended up in a veterinary clinic in Wyoming. The words were delivered without heat. That was what made them deliberate rather than reactive. And now you're in here at 10:30 at night in a federal archive, which is a crime. It's a misdemeanor, Emily said. Unauthorized entry. What you're holding is a felony. What you've been authorizing for the past 7 years is considerably more than that. He stared at her. Darren Cole called me tonight, she said, before he called Agent Forsyth. She watched his face. He told her about the memo, the handwritten one, the courier delivery. She let that sit for 1 second. He told her there were 60 evaluations. He's given investigators a timeline and a structure and your name attached to both. She paused. Whatever you were planning to do with those records, it's already too late. The rear door behind Voss opened. Cole came through it at a pace that was controlled and direct, and Voss turned at the sound, and that was the moment. The precise moment when Lawrence Voss understood that there were people on 3 sides of him and that the 4th side was a wall of filing cabinets and that the documents under his arm were not going to change any of this. He sat down in the chair beside the central table, not dramatically, not with any performance. He just sat, the way a person does when the weight of something finally exceeds what their legs are willing to carry. The expandable folder slid from under his arm to the floor, and he didn't reach for it. Cole looked at Emily across the room. Emily looked at the folder on the floor. Outside, through the frosted glass of the front door, she could see the wash of headlights pulling up to the curb. Tit. What followed was not clean. It never was. Forsyth came through the front door with 2 additional agents Emily hadn't met, and there was a sequence of formal statements and evidence documentation that took the better part of 2 hours, during which Emily sat in a folding chair by the filing cabinets and answered questions in the specific methodical way she answered everything, fully, accurately, without elaboration that wasn't requested. Cole stood near the door. Nobody asked him to leave, and he didn't offer to. Voss was placed under arrest at 11:14 p.m. He didn't speak during the process. He looked at the wall, and then at his hands, and then at nothing in particular, with the expression of a man reorganizing his understanding of how the next several years of his life were going to look. One of the additional agents bagged the expandable folder as evidence. Another photographed the documents on the central table. A third began a systematic inventory of the filing cabinets that Emily knew, from the scope of what Call had described, was going to take significantly longer than tonight. Webb arrived at 11:40. He'd been coordinating the Span office warrant execution and had driven from there. He was a man who moved with the specific efficiency of someone who'd had a long day and was running on the clarity that came at the end of one when all the pieces had stopped being pieces and started being a picture. He shook Emily's hand, actually shook it, which she hadn't expected, and said without preamble, "Your documentation, the authorization codes in the lower right corners of the evaluation forms." "Yes," she said. "We cross-referenced them tonight against the procurement system," he said. "They're authentic, every one of them." He looked at her with the expression of someone delivering information that was also a form of acknowledgement. They tied directly to Voss's authorization chain and to 3 contracted evaluators under Span. What you built 4 years ago was accurate. Emily received this without visible reaction. She'd known it was accurate. She'd known it for 4 years with the specific, grinding certainty of a person who has been right about something and had the experience of being right about it feel exactly like being wrong because the outcome was indistinguishable. "And the broader scope," she said, "what Call described. We're still pulling records, Webb said, but the procurement trail is consistent with a pattern going back further than the timeline you documented. 7, possibly 8 years. And the memo Cole mentioned, he paused. We found a reference to it in Span's physical files. Not the memo itself, but a receipt of delivery, stamped and logged. To the Congressional Liaison Office, Emily said. To a specific staff member in that office, Webb said carefully. We're not making public statements about that piece yet, but I'll say it's not going to stay quiet. Emily nodded. She'd understood, from the moment Forsyth had said the words congressional liaison, that the investigation had entered a dimension where the timeline was no longer measured in days. Things at that level moved through layers of legal and political process that she had no control over and couldn't rush. She'd understood that, and she'd filed it under things she couldn't manage. What she could manage was what was already in evidence. What she could manage was Titan's file and the orthopedic referral to Dr. Sandoval and the 9 other cases she had work to do on in the morning. If she still had a job in the morning. She looked at Webb. I was placed on administrative suspension this afternoon, she said, by the hospital's department head for communicating diagnostic findings without physician oversight. Webb looked at her for a moment. I'm aware, he said. We're going to need you available for additional interviews and documentation review over the next several weeks. I'll be making a formal request to the hospital administration that you be reinstated, given that the findings in question were directly relevant to an active federal investigation and your cooperation has been essential. He paused. That's not a guarantee of anything, but it's what I can do. Thank you, she said. She went back to the folding chair. Her shoulder had moved from complaining to insisting, and she rotated it carefully, working out the specific pull she'd been ignoring since that morning. Cole appeared with a paper cup of coffee from somewhere, she hadn't seen him leave, and set it on the filing cabinet beside her without comment. She drank it. It was bad coffee, the kind that came from a gas station or a vending machine or anywhere that coffee was not the primary concern. It was exactly what she needed. At 1 a.m, they let her leave. Cole drove her back to her building in his rental, a different one than the unaccounted-for car she'd seen in her parking lot, which had been processed as part of the evening's evidence collection. They didn't talk much on the drive. The town was genuinely quiet at this hour, the way small towns at altitude went quiet, the sky overhead actually showing stars through a cold, clear atmosphere. Titan's pain management cycle runs until 6 a.m., she said, looking out the window. I know, Cole said. I confirmed with the overnight tech. She glanced at him. He'd called the clinic. She hadn't thought to do it, had been, for the last several hours, occupied by things she'd been building toward for 4 years. And he had, because he'd been thinking about his dog the whole time. She found that significant in a way she couldn't fully articulate and didn't try. The orthopedic referral to Sandoval, she said. Regardless of what happens with my suspension, that referral is in the system. Ostrander can't pull it without flagging it. If the hospital administration is smart, they're going to want to be very careful about what they block right now. Yeah, Cole said. I imagine they are. He pulled up outside her building. She didn't get out immediately, which was unusual for her. What you did tonight, Cole said. Going into the office. That was inadvisable, she said. It was, he said. It was also the thing that made sure he didn't walk out the back with those records. She looked at the building entrance. I've been told I make inadvisable decisions, she said, usually by people who benefit from me not making them. Cole was quiet for a moment. The people at your clinic who ignored your opinions and dumped the hard cases on you and took credit for your work, he said. They were benefiting from your competence and making sure you didn't have the standing to do anything with it. It wasn't a question. She didn't treat it as one. Yes. And the people in the military evaluation chain who buried your complaint, he said. Yes. He looked at the steering wheel. I told you when I came in today that I wanted someone more qualified, he said. I want to say that I understand now how that landed, given everything. She considered that. He was right that it had landed with a particular weight, given everything. She was also aware that he'd said it from inside a system that had trained him to make exactly that assessment in exactly that context, and that what he'd learned today had cost him something. Not just about her, but about the evaluation system he'd trusted with his partner's health for the better part of a decade. You updated your assessment when the evidence changed, she said. That's all anyone can do. He looked at her. That's a very fair way to put it. I'm not always fair about it, she said. But tonight I'm tired and I'm being generous. Something crossed his face that was close to a smile, though it didn't quite arrive. Go get some sleep, he said. Your shoulder's been bothering you for hours. She hadn't mentioned her shoulder. She'd rotated it once in the records office, without thinking, and he'd apparently noted it with the peripheral attention of someone accustomed to monitoring the physical state of people around them in operational contexts. Good night, she said, and got out of the car. She went upstairs. The cat had emerged from under the couch and was sitting on the kitchen table in the exact spot where the document case had been, with the expression of an animal that had been inconvenienced and was prepared to let her know about it. She fed him, stood in the kitchen for a moment, looked at the empty table. 4 years of files. In federal evidence now. In the hands of people who were, as of tonight, actively working rather than actively burying. She'd spent 4 years being careful with those files, storing them, organizing them, maintaining them in sequence. She'd spent 4 years being certain enough of what they contained to keep them, but she'd also spent 4 years not being certain enough of anything else to feel what she was feeling right now, which was complicated and tired and something she didn't have a clean word for. Not relief exactly. More like the specific sensation of having been braced for impact for so long that the muscles had forgotten how to release. She went to bed. She did not sleep immediately. The morning came with the particular indifference of mornings to whatever the night had contained. By 7:30, Emily had showered, eaten, and was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open when the first call came. It was from the hospital administrator, not Deborah, above Deborah. A man named Gregory Holt, who was normally a CC on emails she never thought about, and who was now calling her personal cell with the specific energy of someone who had spent the past 16 hours being briefed on things they wished they hadn't needed to be briefed on. Ms. Vasquez, he said, I want to start by saying that the hospital takes these developments very seriously. I imagine you do, she said. The suspension, he said, was a precautionary measure taken under incomplete information. Given the federal investigation scope and the formal request we received this morning from Special Investigator Webb's office, he paused, cleared his throat. We're rescinding the suspension effective immediately. You're reinstated with full caseload. And Titan's case? She said. Reassigned to you, Holt said. Dr. Ostrander he's agreed that continuity of care is the appropriate approach. She noted that he said Ostrander had agreed rather than that Ostrander had been overruled, which was a courtesy she hadn't requested, but that Holt apparently needed to maintain. I'll be in at 9, she said. Ms. Vasquez, Holt said, and then he stopped. He seemed to be deciding something. The board would like to formally acknowledge, I appreciate that, she said. I'll be in at 9. She hung up. The cat jumped onto the table and sat on her laptop keyboard, which registered as 17 spaces in a document she hadn't been writing. She moved him to the left. He sat on the left portion of the keyboard. She gave up and scratched his ear. The second call came at 8:15 while she was finishing coffee and preparing to leave. It was from a number she didn't recognize, different from last night's unknown numbers, a DC area code. She answered it. Ms. Vasquez, this is Miriam Oates. I'm the Deputy Communications Director for the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Military Procurement. She had the efficient, pre-measured cadence of a person who delivered sensitive information professionally for a living. I apologize for the hour. I wanted to reach you before any public statements were made. Emily set her coffee cup down. About what specifically? The investigation conducted by Special Investigator Webb's office has generated findings that intersect with an ongoing subcommittee inquiry, Oates said carefully. Specifically, the question of oversight gaps in military working dog retirement evaluations. The subcommittee chair has been briefed this morning and has requested that you be contacted about voluntary testimony. Emily's kitchen was very quiet. Testimony, she said. Voluntary at this stage, Oates said. No subpoena, no legal obligation. The chair feels that your documentation and direct knowledge of the evaluation system's structure would be significant to the subcommittee's work. Emily thought about Deborah's face in the hallway. She thought about Ostrander presenting her protocol in the case review. She thought about the senior official 4 years ago who had looked at her complaint documentation and looked at her and seen an inconvenience to be managed rather than a person with a case to be heard. She thought about Titan walking into Harlow's lobby yesterday morning and sitting down beside her as though he'd made a decision nobody else in the building was qualified to make. She thought about 60 evaluations in 7 years and a handwritten memo delivered by courier to avoid a digital trail. "I'll need to review the formal request and have a few days to prepare," she said. "Of course," Oates said. "The chair's office will send the documentation today." A pause. "Ms. Vasquez, what you've maintained over the past 4 years and what you've done in the past 24 hours, the subcommittee is aware of the full picture. The chair wanted me to convey that directly." Emily picked up her coffee cup, put it back down. "Thank you," she said. She ended the call. She sat in her kitchen for a moment with the cat and the silence and the particular weight of a morning that had arrived at a place she'd stopped letting herself believe she'd reach. Then she picked up her bag, checked the time, and left for work. She had patients to see. Titan's pain cycle had ended at 6, and he'd need reassessment. The orthopedic referral to Dr. Sandoval needed a follow-up call to confirm the appointment. There were 2 other cases that had waited too long yesterday, while the world outside the clinic had been doing what it had been doing. She took the stairs down, walked through the parking lot, got in her car. She was 2 blocks from Harlow when her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. Not a call, a message. From Cole. "Sandoval's office called me this morning, said they'd received the referral and could fit him in Friday. Wanted to confirm the imaging would transfer." She sent back, "It will. Tell them yes." A pause. Then, "How are you doing?" She drove through the intersection that was the last turn before the clinic and considered that question, which was asked without a question mark, she noticed, which meant it wasn't entirely a question. She typed back, "I'm going to work." His response came as she was pulling into the parking lot. "That's not what I asked." She sat in the car for a moment. The Harlow Veterinary Trauma Center entrance was 15 feet away, glass doors and the particular institutional fluorescence of a building that ran 24 hours and hadn't slept even when everyone inside it had. She could see Priya through the glass, moving between the reception desk and the corridor with the slightly breathless energy she brought to mornings. Emily looked at her phone. "I don't know yet," she typed. "Ask me in a week." She put the phone in her bag and got out of the car and walked through the entrance. Priya looked up. Her face did something complicated and then settled into an expression of visible, unguarded relief. "You're back," she said. "I'm back," Emily said. She put her bag behind the nursing station, pulled up the morning caseload, and found Titan's file at the top of the queue. She clicked into it, confirmed the overnight monitoring notes were intact, and the pain management had held, and was in the middle of drafting the morning assessment plan when she realized that the 2 other nurses at the station had stopped talking. She looked up. Ostrander was in the hallway entrance. He was looking at her with the expression she'd seen last night in his office, the one that was still working out what it was doing with itself. "Vasquez," he said. "Dr. Ostrander," she said. He nodded at the caseload on her screen. "Titan's the priority this morning." "Yes," she said. "Let me know if you need any additional imaging authorized," he said. "I'll turn it around same day." He walked away before she needed to respond. Priya turned back to her own screen very carefully with the specific neutral expression of someone trying not to react visibly to something significant. Emily went back to the assessment plan. She worked through the morning with the steady, systematic focus that was the only way she knew how to work. No performance, no announcement, no pause for anyone to acknowledge what the last 24 hours had been. Just the cases, one after the next, the animals and the paperwork and the precise, quiet competence that she'd been practicing every day in this building for 3 years while people looked through her. At 11:15, she walked into Titan's bay with the assessment tablet and found Cole already there, sitting in the chair beside the bay with a cup of actual decent coffee, not the vending machine variety, that he handed to her without ceremony when she walked in. She took it. She started the assessment. Titan watched her with his amber eyes and leaned into her hand when she reached his neck, the same way he had the first time, and she took that as what it was. The straightforward, uncomplicated approval of an animal who had made up his mind. "How's the shoulder?" Cole said. "Manageable," she said. "That means bad." "It means manageable." She moved to Titan's rear left leg and began the weight-bearing assessment with the care of someone checking something fragile. "He's tolerating the reduced pain load better than I expected. The inflammation markers from last night's blood panel are down. That's a good sign for the surgical prep." Cole watched her work. "The subcommittee," he said. "Word travels." "Apparently." She made a notation. "It's voluntary testimony. I haven't committed." You're gonna do it," he said. She didn't answer immediately. She finished the notation and stepped back from the bay. "The animals in those 60 evaluations," she said. "The ones I don't have files on. The ones from the years before I was there. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know which ones were like Titan and which ones—" She stopped. "Some of them won't have had good outcomes," Cole said. He said it without softening it, because they'd both arrived at a place where that was the only useful register. "No," she said. "They won't have." She looked at Titan. "If I testify, the subcommittee findings become part of the congressional record. The findings from Webb's investigation become part of the legal record. The documentation I kept becomes something that closes a loop rather than being a file in a case that went nowhere." She paused. "I'm going to do it." "I know," Cole said. Titan exhaled slowly. The monitoring equipment recorded his vitals in the measured rhythm of an animal, finally in less pain than he'd been taught to accept as normal. Emily made the last notation in the assessment and set the tablet down. She picked up the coffee Cole had brought and drank it. It was good. It was genuinely good, and that was such a small thing, and it registered with the specific clarity of small things at the end of large events. She was opening Titan's next protocol screen when the tablet chimed with a priority flag. She looked at it. It was an automated alert from the Federal Evidence System. A case status update forwarded to her contact information by Webb's office as a courtesy notification. She read it once, twice, 3 lines. A case update, time-stamped 40 minutes ago. Subject span, Gerald A. Federal charges filed, 12 counts. Arraignment pending. Subject VOSS. Lawrence D. Federal charges filed, 19 counts including obstruction, evidence tampering, procurement fraud. Arraignment pending. Third subject identified and expanded warrant scope. Name sealed pending formal charges. Congressional Liaison Office notified of subcommittee inquiry. She read the 3rd line again. Third subject. Name sealed. Congressional Liaison Office. It hadn't stopped at Voss. She'd known it probably wouldn't. She'd said as much to Cole last night in the diner. That what Cole had described was a structure, not a single person at the top. But knowing a thing and watching it confirm itself in 3 lines of time-stamped federal case status text were different experiences. "Emily," Cole said. She looked up. He was watching her face, reading whatever he found there. "How far up does it go?" he said. He'd asked that in the diner. Forsyth hadn't answered then. Emily looked back at the tablet, at the 3 lines, at the sealed name and the Congressional Liaison Office and the words expanded warrant scope. "Further than I thought," she said, and the tablet chimed again. The second chime was another status update, but this one came with a name attached, no longer sealed, because the formal charges had been filed in the 40 minutes between the first notification and this one, and the federal system had updated accordingly. The name was a senior staff director in the Congressional Liaison Office, a man who had held his position for 11 years and whose signature appeared on the delivery receipt found in Span's physical files. He was not an elected official. He was the kind of person who made things happen in the space between elected officials and the operations those officials never looked at directly. He was, Emily understood immediately, exactly the kind of person a structure like this required to function. Invisible enough to be useful, connected enough to be protected. Until he wasn't. She set the tablet down on the bay railing and stood with that for a moment. Titan watched her. The monitoring equipment kept its rhythm. Cole didn't say anything, which she appreciated because there wasn't anything to say that the silence wasn't already saying. 3 people charged, a federal investigation active across 2 states, A Senate subcommittee inquiry opened, and somewhere in the records archive on Wheeler Avenue, agents were still working through 12 years of physical files that would take weeks to process fully. It wasn't over. Not legally, not procedurally. These things never ended in a single morning. They moved through courts and hearings and the long institutional machinery of consequence. And they took time, and sometimes they delivered less than they should, and sometimes the people at the edges walked away cleaner than they deserved. But the structure was exposed. The mechanism was named. And the documents that had made that possible had spent 4 years in a gray fireproof case in the back of a closet, maintained by a woman nobody at Harlow Veterinary Trauma Center had ever thought to ask about. She picked up the tablet and went back to work. Titan's surgery happened on a Friday in Cheyenne, performed by Dr. Anika Sandoval, who was exactly as good as Emily had said she was. The repair took 3 hours and 40 minutes. Cole sat in the surgical waiting area for all of it, which was, Emily thought when he told her later, about the most honest thing a person could do with that kind of time. The procedure addressed the fracture, the chronic inflammation around the joint, and the secondary soft tissue damage that had accumulated over a year of compensated movement. It was not simple. The recovery would not be simple. Dr. Sandoval told Cole afterward that the dog had been operating through significant chronic pain for longer than anyone had recognized, and that his behavioral stability throughout that period was a function of the specific, extraordinary stoicism of animals trained to work. Cole called Emily from the parking lot of the surgical center after. She was on her break, sitting in the Harlow break room with bad coffee and a case file she was trying to finish before the afternoon. She said he did well, Cole said. I know, Emily said. Sandoval texted me the surgical notes. A pause. Of course she did. He's going to need 6 weeks of restricted movement before physical therapy starts, Emily said. I can put you in contact with a canine rehabilitation specialist in Laramie who's very good. Emily. She does water therapy, which is better for hip repairs than weight-bearing exercise in the early... Emily. His voice had something in it that stopped her. Thank you. She sat with that for a moment. In the break room, someone had left a half-eaten bag of pretzels on the counter, and the coffee machine was making its preparatory sound for a cycle nobody had started deliberately. Everything was very ordinary, and the phone in her hand was carrying something that wasn't. He would have found his way here regardless, she said. Maybe, Cole said, but you're the one who was standing in the lobby. She didn't have an answer for that, so she didn't manufacture one. Call me when he's out of recovery, she said. I want to know his first weight-bearing assessment. I will, he said. She hung up and finished her coffee and went back to her patients. She testified before the Senate subcommittee 11 weeks later on a Tuesday in March in a room in Washington that was significantly less dramatic than the word testimony implied. Fluorescent lighting, a long table, 7 subcommittee members with varying levels of attention, and a court reporter whose typing speed was quietly impressive. She had prepared for 3 weeks with Webb's team and a federal attorney who had the specific blend of thoroughness and pragmatism she responded to, and she delivered her account with the same quality she brought to everything, accurately, completely, and without elaboration that wasn't asked for. She was on the stand for 4 hours. She did not perform, she did not cry, she did not make speeches. She answered the questions that were put to her, and when the subcommittee chair asked her near the end whether she believed the existing oversight structure for military working dog evaluations was adequate, she said no, and explained precisely why, and what adequate would look like, and what it would cost to implement it, and how the cost compared to the financial benefit the existing system had generated for the people who'd built it. The subcommittee chair looked at her over his reading glasses for a moment after she finished that answer. Ms. Vasquez, he said, you filed the original complaint 4 years ago. Yes. And when it was closed without action, you retained your documentation. Yes. Why? He said. Not aggressively. The same quality as Cole's question in the diner, actually asking. Emily thought about Titan walking through Harlow's lobby. She thought about the registration number on the clearance certificate for a 4-year-old Belgian Shepherd who hadn't made it. She thought about the gray document case in the back of the closet, carried through 3 apartments, never opened in front of anyone. Because I was right, she said. And I thought eventually that would matter to someone. The room was quiet for a moment. It matters, the chair said. Gerald Spann was convicted on 9 of 12 counts, 8 months after his arrest. The sentencing included prison time, the permanent revocation of his veterinary license, and a financial penalty that consumed the bulk of the contractor revenue that had made the scheme worth building in the first place. Lawrence Voss was convicted on 14 of 19 counts. The obstruction charges were the ones that held cleanest, given what had been documented in the records office on Wheeler Avenue, and received a sentence that removed him from any position of federal authority permanently and without exception. The staff director from the Congressional Liaison Office accepted a plea agreement that included full cooperation with the ongoing investigation and a sentence suspended on the condition of permanent disbarment from federal employment. 3 additional evaluators connected to Spann's network were charged in a secondary proceeding. 2 accepted plea agreements. 1 went to trial and lost. New oversight protocols for military working dog retirement evaluations were announced by the Department of Defense 7 months after Emily's testimony. The protocols included mandatory imaging review by an independent veterinary panel, a standardized assessment checklist that could not be modified by the evaluating contractor, and a complaint mechanism that reported directly to the Inspector General's office rather than routing through the review board. The protocols were not named after anyone. They were simply new rules implemented without ceremony that would mean something real to the animals they applied to. Emily read about them on a Thursday morning at the Harlow nursing station between cases, on her phone, while Priya was restocking the supply cabinet behind her, and the cattle dog in Bay 3 was making his opinion about post-surgical movement restrictions loudly known. She read the announcement twice, put her phone in her pocket, and went to see about the cattle dog. She was not recognized publicly. She did not want to be. The investigation generated media coverage. Webb's office made statements. The subcommittee hearing was covered in the veterinary and military press, and her name appeared in those accounts. But she was not the story anyone chose to center, which suited her. She was a nurse at a mid-sized veterinary trauma clinic in Creston Falls, Wyoming. She had work to do. Titan came back to Harlow for his final post-surgical assessment on a Wednesday in April, 6 months after he'd come through the lobby doors the first time. He walked in on his own. No stumbling, no compensation in the rear left, no subtle redistribution of weight that only someone watching the feet would catch. He moved like a dog who had recently remembered what moving without pain felt like and was still mildly astonished by it. Cole came with him. He looked less worn than he had in October. Not rested exactly, but less like someone carrying a weight that had been on him long enough to change his posture. He'd spent the winter in Laramie, working with the rehabilitation specialist Emily had recommended, doing the patient, incremental work of getting Titan back to himself. Emily ran the assessment herself. Weight-bearing, range of motion, gait analysis across a marked floor grid, the specific careful palpation of the repaired joint that she'd done enough times now to read with her hands as much as her eyes. Titan submitted to all of it with the cooperative dignity she'd come to expect from him, and then sat beside her when she finished and leaned against her leg the same way he had the first day, as though that was simply where he'd decided to be. Clean, she said, full weight-bearing, no compensation, inflammation markers are normal. He's done. Cole exhaled. Just once, short and controlled, the relief of a person who had been waiting for that word for a long time. Good, he said. Emily scratched Titan behind the ear. He accepted this as his due. He's going to be fine, she said, however you decide to use the time you have with him. Cole looked at his dog for a moment, then at Emily. I'm staying in Wyoming, he said. There's a canine training program out of Casper. They work with rescue organizations, place working dogs with veterans. I've been in conversations with them. That sounds right for him, she said. For both of us, Cole said. She looked at him. He looked at her. There was something in that exchange that was straightforward and human and didn't require elaboration, and so she didn't elaborate, and neither did he. Come back in 3 months, she said. Routine check. I want to follow up on the joint. We'll be here, he said. She walked them out through the lobby, the same sliding glass doors that Titan had come through in October, like something detonating. He walked out of them calmly, in the afternoon light, beside the man who'd brought him in, and the doors slid shut behind them. Emily stood at the entrance for a moment. Priya was at the reception desk. The monitoring system in the corridor was running its afternoon cycle. Bay 3 was occupied by a new patient, an aging border collie with a joint condition that was going to require careful management and a treatment plan she'd already started drafting. She had work to do. She turned away from the doors. She went back to the nursing station and pulled up the border collie's file and got to it. No announcement, no pause, no moment of reflection that she asked anyone to witness. Just the next case, and the one after that, and the work that had always been there, being done by the person who had always been capable of doing it. The difference was simply that now the building knew it too. Not because she'd become someone different, not because she'd performed anything or won anything or arrived anywhere she hadn't already been. She'd been right 4 years ago. She'd been competent every day in between. She'd kept the files not as a weapon, but as a record. The insistence maintained in a gray document case through 3 apartments and 4 years of invisibility that the truth had weight even when nobody was willing to hold it. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the room to notice them. Emily Vasquez had simply made sure that when the room finally looked, there was something undeniable to see. The border collie in Bay 3 made a sound of complaint about his cone. Emily went to see about it.